It's a beautiful day in a beautiful part of the world. We're just a few miles outside Ballymena for the first in our Talking Dogs Meets series. Yes, over the next few months we will be meeting plenty of people who have had a big impression on greyhound racing. And our first, well, it's Lynda Bonner, an OBE no less. Let's join Lynda for our chat. You speak of your father there. I assume that's where your love for greyhounds grew, through your dad, through going to the track as a young one.
Yeah, Dad and his brother-in-law were always involved in greyhounds. Dad lived in Manchester for a while, and he loved going to Bellevue at the time. And then when they came back here to Northern Ireland, his brother-in-law had a wee schooling track called the Moorhen, which isn't too far from here. And so him and his brother-in-law spent many a night going to Dunmore Stadium, and it was a great life for them, and for me it was a fantastic childhood, because whenever my schoolmates were heading off to discos and things like that, I was sort of heading off to Dunmore Stadium, and it was just a great life because I grew up mostly with adults. I'm an only child, and I enjoyed the company more of adults really than kids, and being able to talk about the pedigrees of dogs. And then were the days where if you didn't have greyhound data to sort of look up the pedigrees, and you had to remember them. So I would have maybe a whole collection of race cards with the last lines of form for the dogs and the breeding of the dogs. And you know, every time we'd have a dog on in Dunmore Stadium, Dad would say, "Lynda, what's that dog anyway?" And I would start rifling through the old sporting presses and the old race cards, and I'd say, "Oh, that one's well bred." And Data made a great change where you didn't have to remember all that stuff. So
you can go back 100 years there.
Oh, it's amazing. It is amazing, and they're a brilliant breed of dog. You know, that's what I also like about the greyhound. You know, I remember Dad and Mum and me going to buy this girl's mother skinny jeans. Tiny, come here. And we had to buy her, we travelled to Mayo for the day out, and the man that was selling her lived near Knock, so he took us to Knock. It was the first time we'd ever been to Knock, and it was just... You
prepared as she was a fast one?
It was an amazing experience. It wasn't quite what we expected. You know, we didn't expect to be going to Knock on the day that we were buying this girl's mum. I don't remember years very well, but I can remember the journey from the day that we picked up Skinny Jeans to the day that Skinny Jeans was racing for Dad, and Skinny Jeans always liked to be equal to the dog in front, but she was never very brave. She never really wanted to go on ahead of it, and she usually won her races by a short head or something. And I remember one night Dad phoning me in London and saying, "Oh, she won," and she was in a six-bend race, and the only place that she was in front was on the line.
That's the only place you need to be in front.
And it was just so funny. And then she went over to England and went to race for Paul Donovan in Wimbledon, and then whenever she'd finished her racing career, she came back over here to Dad, and then it was shortly after that Dad was diagnosed with a cancer. I remember Dad telling me in the background when I was holding the phone, he was saying, "Tell her I'll fight it, tell her I'll fight it." You know, and that was Dad's mentality all the time. Tell her, you know, he was never one to give up. So that was okay. I had to then arrange to come home. My husband and me had to arrange to sell our house and come home. And Skinny Jeans, of course, went into season. She was here with a young pup at the time called PhD. And the two of them were here at the time, and Dad was going to, you know, obviously race PhD when the time came. And I remember having to come home, and Martin Tucker from Mount Cashel Kennels, he came up and he said, "Look, I'll take Skinny Jeans and I'll take the pup and I'll look after them till you can come home." And Dad said, "Oh, but I wanted tiny Skinny Jeans to have some pups." And I was like, "Oh gosh, you know, we've already got enough on our plate here. You know, we have to move house, we have to come home, I have to arrange care for Mum until I can get home. And selling a house in London isn't, you know, going to happen overnight." But Martin Tucker took Skinny Jeans down, and he had a stud dog called Ninja Jamie, and that started Skinny Jeans having 3 litters of pups. And honestly, the experience and the journey through that has kept us all going.
It's lengthened your father's life.
Absolutely. He said, I want to live long enough to see Brandywell reopen, which was his one main goal, and to see Skinny Jeans pups race. And every single pup of Skinny Jeans had raced and won, and apart from 3 races, I think it was, they'd won over 225 races, her pups. It was amazing, for she wasn't super, she was just a lovely dog, and he just loved her character, and she was just so adorable.
She clearly threw dogs and bitches in her own model, sort of had a good ethic.
They'd a great character, but they'd a far better racing ability than she had. And I mean, it just, I remember coming up here, oh, why Skinny Jeans pup won last night again. Which one was that, you know? And Dad just loved to hear about it, and the friends that we made through it. You know, friends in England and America and everywhere in the world, you know, and people used to follow Skinny Jeans pups on Facebook and that. So it was such a great journey. And as I say, I can't tell you the years, but I can tell you the journey through Skinny Jeans. And then Tiny, her pup here, when I came back from London, I decided that I would have a second litter of pups with Skinny Jeans, and I looked after Skinny Jeans here myself. And it was it gave me great focus to my day. You know, every day I was spending with the pups and Skinny Jeans, and the dreams about what they might be and what they could be in their racing career. But as long as their welfare was looked after, that was what was important. And anybody that bought the pups from me, I mean, Kevin Hutton bought 2, you know, I knew that everybody, the pups would be well looked after, and if there were any welfare issues at any point, they would come back to me, because I had the facility here to take them on. But they all got great homes, and they all had great racing careers. And actually, the 2 that Kevin Hutton bought gave us one of the most amazing times, because they made it through to the Graders Derby at Toaster, and there was £10,000 for that. Now, we didn't own the dogs, Kevin Hutton and his owners owned them.
Yeah, but but you always have ownership of them.
Oh, for goodness sake, every time they raced, it was just so thrilling. It was I think it was over 4 weeks, and it was actually a 6-week experience, because you didn't know if you were going to get into the Graders Derby, because they didn't announce what grade it was going to be until the race card went up. So we actually get into it, and the 2 of them get into it, and both of them made it through to the final. And I remember Dad and Mum and Jimmy Anderson, a friend, and Betty Shaw, a friend, they come up to our house near Ballymena, and we set it up on the internet, and we were all sitting there watching the final on the. It was like the Irish Derby, you know. It was our Irish Derby, and we were just shouting and cheering, and it was just amazing. And the dog finished second, and you know, it ran its might. It was just, you were so proud of it. And the wee girl, she finished a wee bit further down the field. But to have that experience, we never had a derby experience, but we had that experience, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget I can't tell you what I done yesterday, but I can remember that. Yeah. And then little Tiny here, who was from the same litter.
She spent time in the UK?
Yeah, what happened was with her, I reared her and her brother here, Scamp, and her brother's retired with my trainer's family down in Kilkenny. Lovely people, the Kavanagh family, salt of the earth people. I was so lucky to meet them. And the dog was so happy racing with them that it loved their family. Well, at the time they had 2 wee boys, and now they have another little boy and a little girl. And a few Jack Russells, and he lives in the house with them, and it would have broke his heart to bring him back here to keep him with Tiny. So he lives in the house with them, and Tiny, when she started racing, the Brandywell closed. That would have been the time she was going to start racing, and I couldn't really leave my parents to be going travelling at that time. So I decided, look, I've no children, and I suppose our dogs are like our children. You know, this was my only litter of pups that I had brought into the world, and well, my husband was there the day that she whelped. I unfortunately was out of the country that one day. It's the only day in about 10 years I was out of the country, but my husband was here.
Was Dr. Neville that day,
Dr. Neville, and there was lots of instructions over the phone, and the vet was involved.
It was like landing a plane over the phone, was it?
It was. I was supposed to be doing a nursing lecture at the time, and in between lectures I was getting updates on the pups. But anyway, all went well, and then after she finished her racing career, which she was only A5 or whatever, but gave us so much fun and enjoyment, and we decided we'd my trainer said, look, if you want to take a litter of pups, if you want her to have the opportunity to have a litter of pups, we'll do that for you. And she had a small litter, and they had no great athletic ability, but what was most important is that they grew up with a family down there that just loved them. I was getting regular footage of them playing with the family, the kids, and playing with toys in the field, and it felt like I was looking after them without the bother. And then when they just got rehomed through the Irish Retired Greyhound Trust, and they're over in Florida. They went over to Florida and found homes there.
Living their best life.
And they've got better weather than us, I would say, but look at today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not often you get weather like this.
It's the Florida of the North. There's a lot of ground cover there in that period of time. You reference your trips to the various tracks in the North with your father. That is obviously where the love came from, where you first started. What were your first memories? Would it have been trips to Brandywell, or was Brandywell always the number one, or was it a case of wherever suited your dogs you'd go?
It was wherever suited the dogs would go. It would have been mainly Dunmore. It would have been Dunmore Park Stadium was our hallowed ground, big galloping track.
And so many in the North. It was a behemoth. It was huge. It was people don't remember. It was a 4-bend, 700-yard trip. Like, this was colossal. And it suited obviously the sprinters. You had a 435-yard sprint, and you had a 700-meter 4-bender. You also had a 525 4-bender, telling you the length of the straights. The betting ring was unbelievable, but it was the craziest place of all time.
When you're mentioning that, the memories are just coming flooding back. When you mentioned the 435 sprint, I'm thinking of Flagstar. Don't ask me where that came from, but I remember.
Walked for me.
Oh, right. There you go. Flagstar for me. Peter Edwards' dog, cracking dog. I think he was a part coursing bred too. And then, but we always wanted to have a winner of the Sean P. Graham 700, and that was where my love of staying came from. And Skinny Jeans was a stayer. I always loved the staying breeds, and we always would have loved to have had a dog to race in the Sean P. Graham 700, but we never did. And the 525, our greatest memory at Dunmore would have been Copernicus, that race. Dad was looking after him for his owner, and I remember there was a final he got into with Kerry Flyer, which was a local Ballymena dog. Now, it was probably an A3 grade at the race or whatever. It wasn't any great thing, but I remember for a week prior to that final, looking at the form and analysing their sectional times and their finishing times and working out. I said, Dad, this dog could win this. This dog could, if he'd done absolutely everything right. And according to the run of the race, if this one moves in and that one moves out, he could win it.
It was a bit like Dundalk now. We had a really short run to the corner, and if you had a trappy dog that could hold its position at the third bend and kick again.
Copernicus was the sort of dog that stayed clear of trouble. He would not get himself into trouble. So what happened with Copernicus was he knew where the winning line was. Now, that seems odd, but that night of that final, he knew, the three of us went up in the car, Mum on the front seat, Dad in the drive, and me in the back seat with the dog. The one side of the back seat went down, and Mum was patting the dog's feet and praying over the dog's feet, in the back in the car. And I remember the journey, and we were talking about every sort of way that race could be run for that dog to win. And Copernicus came out, and Kerry Flyer was away out in front. Of course she was. And Copernicus was keeping out of trouble, and he was running wide. And he'd just done everything to nearly throw the race away. And coming to the line, he was 2 strides down. He was not going to make it. And that dog jumped at that line. Dad, I can still see it. And Dad and me just lifted the rafters, the two of us. I'll not say what happened to Dad at the time, but he was so excited. It was one of them memories I'll never forget to the day I died. And it was just terrific. And they actually, in later years, somebody was able to give me the photo finish of Kerry Flyer and Copernicus, and it was just a nose.
He had his nose down at the time.
Just his nose. He jumped at the line. He was 2 strides down, and when he went round to where the hair escape goes in, he had this habit of always turning before he got there and coming into the centre of the track and running over to Dad. He loved Dad, he just did, but sure, Dad was working with him all the time and massaging him, and every night after work, it was out to the kennels and spent his whole evening in the kennels looking after the dogs. It was a great life, It was a great life, and it was because I worked with my father with the dogs. You know, when I would come home from school, we were always out walking the dogs. We lived in the town at the time, so we'd no grass. So we had to put the dogs in the car and go up to the nearest field, and we would walk around the field with the dogs and let them off one at a time. And you know, that time was time for me and my father to talk, and you know, how'd you get on at school today, and you know, where we were going to place the dogs next week. Would it be Oaks Park in Dungannon? We used to go there, or we used to go to the Brandywell. We used to go to Lifford. We loved Lifford as well. Dunmore was probably the easiest for us from where we lived at the time. But if we had a dog, we would travel no matter how far away it was. In fact, when I lived in London, it was quite regular for me to come home on a plane on a Saturday morning. So I would drive from my house to maybe Luton Airport, fly into one of the Belfast airports. Dad would meet me, drive home to here.
I was going to say dog in the back of the van. No, you'd come back to pick up the dog.
Come back here, pick up Alan Cherry, who we bought of Peter Comerford. Now, Peter Comerford deserved Susie's Sapphire because that man was putting lots of money into the sport for many, many years. And I remember buying Alan Cherry of him because she was out of Brett Lee, and at the time his stud fee was €5,000. And Peter Comerford gave me a very good deal for Alan Cherry, and she was a great wee dog for us. So we put Alan Cherry into the car, and Dad wasn't really, it was at the time Dad was starting to just deteriorate. Before he was diagnosed with cancer, we just didn't know what was wrong. And put her in the car, and Mum and me would head off to Shelburne Park. And we would win a race with her and come back here, and it was great because I was exhausted by the time I would get back, and Dad would just, you know, take her from me at the gate and, oh, well done, Cherry, and take her into the kennel and give her dinner and pet her, and there was always a big welcome for her, whether she won or didn't win, you know. And if she didn't win, it was the racing manager's fault, okay? Definitely.
That's a tale as old as time.
Aye, well, that's it. So it was never the dog's fault, it's always the racing manager's fault. And then the next morning I would be up at the crack of dawn again, and Dad would drive me to the airport, get a plane back, and I would go back to work as a nurse on Monday morning. You know, so that happened every time Alan Cherry raced in Shelburne, and it's more than a handful. That was what I had to do. I had to fly from London to come home, pick her up, and take her to Shelburne, because that's where she was, you know, she was excelling there. And funny, she raced at Brandywell and couldn't win a race at Brandywell. And neither did Skinny Jeans. Neither of them could win a race at Brandywell, yet they could win elsewhere. Skinny Jeans even, she went over to England for, as I said, for a period of time, and she won a trophy race at Hove. It was fantastic. I think she won it by a short head as well.
Similar enough dimensions to Shelburne Park, of course.
Well,
seemed like she liked to gallop and track. You said she was a strong stayer.
Yeah, she was. She was.
I was going to say, it seemed like your greyhound racing life is nearly split into two, but it's not quite as simple as that, because when you were in London, you were still very much involved in terms of keeping an eye. You tell how you used to get the plane back and go to the tracks and whatnot. But in reality, it is sort of split in two. Your early memories here with your father, going up and down the country. You went to London as you were basically a child. You were early 20s, even 20, 21, 22, and then came back about a decade ago.
Yeah.
And since you've come back, obviously you've got hugely involved in the sport over here. We're going to get into that in a moment or two, but we do have to mention that point in the middle, where you became the second most famous OBE in greyhound racing. Obviously the most famous, you know, in fairness, he probably does deserve it with 6 or 7 English Derby titles, is Charlie Lister, but our second OBE in greyhound racing is Lynda Bonner. Now, firstly, you have to tell us about that.
Funny, well, the first thing to say about that is actually the minute you mentioned Charlie Lister, it just brought back another incredible memory. And maybe, well, I don't know if you have time to hear about it, but sure, you can cut it out if you haven't. But Dad hated flying, right? He hated coming on airplanes or anything, you know, it was just something they just hated doing. And when I was in London, I said, look, Dad, come on over for the English Derby, come on. And he says, oh, Lynda, I don't, I says, come on, Johnny, come on over for the Derby. I'll be there to meet you all. Anyway, he plucked up the courage and he got on the plane, and he came over for the English Derby, and it was the year that Some Picture was in the English Derby. And I says, look... Having
already won at Scotland.
I didn't even remember that, but there you go.
He was looking to win the Scottish, the Irish, or the English and the Irish in the one year.
There you go. Well, anyway, he said he came over and I said, look, I lived in Camberwell at the time and it wasn't far from Wimbledon. So we drove down to Wimbledon and I said, look, Dad, before we'll put our wee bet on, neither of us are gamblers, but you have a wee flutter just for the interest. We'll put our bet on and I know where to stand so that we get a good view of the race, and we'll do that straight after the race before it's over. We'll go to the corner of the bend, the first bend, and we'll just stay there and we'll not move until the derby's on. And of course, I'd been in London a few years at the time, and this fella came up and he was sort of, just as the race was about to start, and he was sort of trying to, get a position. And I was like holding firm, I wasn't going to move. And Dad was like, oh, here, sir, here. And he just moved aside and let the man in. And I was like, well, that sort of defeated the purpose, Dad. And anyway, Dad started talking to him, and Dad had made room for him, and he says, what are you on? And Dad, the man says, oh, I own the 6th dog in this race. And Dad said, oh God, that's the one we have bet, that's some picture. And he said, I own it. Now, obviously, it was Steve Spiteri. And he was obviously, the adrenaline of it all, he was going to make it into that reel to see the dog regardless. So Dad says, oh, well, we've bet it. And listen, I flew over from from Ireland to see this dog win. And the man says, well, if it wins, you'll come on a lap of honour with us. And Dad says, well, it'll win. Don't you worry, it'll win. And of course, some picture flew out and away and round the track and won. And I'm getting goosebumps even telling you about it. And Steve Spiteri sort of took him. He says, come on, you're coming on the lap of honour with us. And Dad found himself on a lap of honour in Wimbledon Stadium, walking after some picture.
With 2 future OBEs.
Yes, and actually at the time didn't even know that. Actually, I don't know at that time even if Charlie had his either. And Steve Nash was able to produce a picture with Dad, and Dad was standing beside, in the podium picture. Dad was standing, beside Charlie Lister and Steve Spiteri, and there was Dad at the corner of the picture. Steve Spiteri I think he thought he was his lucky Irish charm, And so Dad got the whole Derby experience, and that made it for me, because I thought, look, we're never going to have a Derby winner. It's so rare that happens. But Dad
That's
still
a memory you will bring to your last days.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, yes, the OBE, yes, then Charlie Lister got his OBE, and very well deserved. And I must say my OBE came more as a team award, really, because I worked with a fantastic group of haematologists and nurses and doctors and pharmacists at a leading teaching hospital in London. And what we did, we sort of tried to make sure that venous thromboembolism was seen as a risk factor for all patients coming into hospital. And through the work that we did, and I created a national nursing and midwifery network of nurses that focused on the issue for England. And as a part of that, they awarded me an OBE, and it was a very special
Who presented?
thing. Actually, the Queen herself. Yes, the Queen.
Wow.
It was very special because I remember the letter coming. I was at this house when the letter arrived at the post, and my husband got it, and it said, only to be opened by addressee only. And I thought, oh gosh.
You had no inkling of it
No,
beforehand?
but I was already here, living here. I left in 2014, and the OBE came in 2017. And the team had put me
So
forward
it's obviously
for this.
recommended by someone else.
I think maybe the process takes a while as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and my husband got the letter, and I said, oh, just open it. It's probably a parking ticket. Open it. And he said, no, it said strictly not open it. And I eventually got him to
Never
open
follows
it.
the rules, does he?
I eventually got him to open it after an argument, and then it was from, to say that I was getting this OBE. And the next thing was, well, how can we get my father in a wheelchair over to London for me to get this OBE?
Did you initially believe it?
No, I didn't. I thought, but then he says it is. It's this is what it's about. And I says, oh,
I assume that's framed.
It's all over the house. There's certificates and medals, and you also get letters from lots of the local politicians, which is really quite unusual. Surprising. I got letters from Princess Anne and people like that, and I thought, wow, it was quite an experience. But the main experience, and again it comes back to my father, who always had my back since I was a child, and he'll be here today looking at this thinking, Ian Fortune.
He's already provided a son.
Ian Fortune is at my house. I mean, what is that all about? And I anyway, look, I remember my husband and me and the professor I worked with all went to London to meet the Queen. Right, the professor was already over there, but I wanted him to come
That's not
along.
a line a lot of people get to say.
No, it was very surreal. And I remember coming out and I remember looking at my father and thinking, this is so surreal. And the Queen was standing there and the Queen said something to me, which I don't remember what she even said to me, but I just said, that's my father. You know, it was just, that's my father.
Special memories.
Oh, unbelievable, unbelievable. And so, I mean, she was very pleasant, whatever she said, and we shook her hand. And
Didn't try and sell her a pup, no?
No, I would have loved to say, look, it's time you get rid of them corgis and got some good, decent greyhounds,
She wouldn't have been the first member of the royal family to own a greyhound.
No, that's for sure, that's for sure.
That brings us to part 3. Your time since you came back, obviously you came back to look after your mother and father. You left the nursing behind, you had no choice. But you threw yourself in behind the Brandywell project and in behind greyhound racing as a whole, and I suppose you skilled up in certain ways. You certainly got use of Facebook and Twitter, as it was known, and getting the message out there. You really have thrown yourself behind the greyhound industry, the greyhound sport, and I tend not to call it an industry. I prefer to call it a sport, and much like yourself. You know why the people are involved. They're not involved in it for industry reasons, not to make money. This is a sport where you give your all, and if you get a few quid out of it, so be it. But if not, you're in for the passion. And you've become also a spokesperson on behalf of greyhound racing, certainly here in the north. Only recently you were speaking to Nick Luck and Racing UK. You've spoken to many people in the past. Something you've really thrown yourself into. And I suppose it's easy because you can do it from at home sometimes, you know, on the computer, on the laptop, whatever you need to do. Firstly, let's talk about the Brandywell project. It closed in late 2016. Your father, we haven't mentioned his name. He was Robert, but known as Bobby.
Bobby, Robert Bonner.
Yeah.
His closest sisters and brothers called him Bobby, and that mum always called him Robert. So, you know, and yeah, Dad loved the Brandywell. He told a story once where he said, look, I remember going to the Brandywell on the bars of the bicycle that my father was riding when he was a little boy. So Dad loved the Brandywell, and he loved the fact that it got reopened again, and he was there on opening night, and he had a great time seeing people he hadn't seen for many years.
Like as we're sitting here, we are a matter of days away from its. What year was it? 2018. So we're only nearly 7 years since the Brandywell has reopened. Can you believe we got to this point that the Brandywell has reopened and it's still brand new and shiny, but still an awful lot of work goes into it, and that's where you step in. You know, most of the sponsorships are through you. You were telling me earlier on about memorial events, and people want to keep that up, and as a result you get a lot of repeat business in terms of sponsorships and people coming back and celebrating at the track.
Yeah, well, when I came back, Brandywell became my second work family because I missed my work family in London. And I was just welcomed into the work family at Brandywell. You know, just everything I do is voluntary, but, you know, to be allowed to do it, to be trusted to do it. They didn't know who I was really, you know, so it was just nice that I was trusted to be able to help, you know, do some of the comms for the track. And the sponsorship that we get at the Brandywell comes, it's just all, it comes through as well. Track Lotto, that's organised by Thomas Hassan, who has done a cracking job over the years, and a lot of the gala nights he organised. But between the work of the Track Lotto, the work that our Brandywell Greyhound supporters group do, which we formed a committee, and I would be the chair of that committee, and also there's a few people like Sean Melly and Kevin Canning that organise their own memorial nights as well. So it's just something that has, there's a feeling of belonging at the Brandywell. And there's an old saying, it means a lot to me since my father died. You know, they say that you die 3 times. The first time is when you physically take your last breath. The second time is when your name is last spoken. And the third is whenever the last person that ever knew you or can remember you passes away. And through the memorial nights, you know, you're keeping that message, you're keeping that name alive. And one of the things my father used to do towards the end when he would meet people in the cancer centre, he knew, you know, he maybe didn't have that long left because he had a second type of cancer that actually got to him. It was a leukemia. He fought the prostate cancer, he fought the spinal cancer. It was, unfortunately, that was cancer's third time lucky. He got leukemia and it wasn't going to be able to be fought. And he would just, you know, he would say to somebody, he'd lift them by the hand like this and he'd say, I wish you all the luck in life. And the tears would be in his eyes when he'd be saying it because he would know. So, and he would do that to everybody he met. Sorry.
It's okay.
And that's why, sorry, excuse me for a moment, but now whenever we organise a meeting for Dad, we call it the All the Luck in Life night. And we have a gala night, All the Luck in Life. And it's a lovely saying. And we even get collars and we get All the Luck in Life engraved on them. Because it's not always about, excuse me.
It's not necessarily about greyhounds. It's when you see it on paper, you'd go, oh, you know, you're wishing them a bit of luck and, you know, may they get a winning turn or something. But it's more than that.
It is. Sorry for coughing there. Get a little choked up. But I can still see him. I can still see him. And you know, I suppose I get so engaged with the greyhound industry because I know the life I've had. And it's a great life for anybody. You know, I would recommend it for children growing up and the community of people that you're involved with. For me, going to the Brandywell on a Monday, it's just like a family. You know, I don't have brothers and sisters. My greyhound family are my closest relatives, and my husband obviously as well, and my mum. But you know, and I go to the Lifford on a Sunday as well. So it's just fantastic to have that life for me now, and I wish people could understand what it means to people in the racing industry. And yeah.
No, I like it. Obviously, apart from the Brandywell, you're also now taking on a bit of work for Lifford and for Drumbo Park. You know, it's Northern Greyhound Racing. Like, you're not going to say it, but they really do owe you a debt of gratitude. You've put your heart and soul into it. Certainly, these last 10 years, especially. You have your finger in a few of the pies up here in a sense where, not from a financial point of view, but from just keeping the sport relevant and keeping the name of greyhound racing in the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, again, Drumbo do great work too down there in Belfast, and it's just a matter of helping us with some of their comms sometimes, and it's great because I can do that work, as you say, at home. And you know, I can still look after Mum and the dogs and the cats and everything else and still be working away. I like to always be doing two things at once. I get bored if I'm only doing one thing at once, so I can usually, you know, multitask very well. And if people understood the sport and the passion that's in the sport, and it's not about the money, it actually, you know, we're owed thousands, I'm sure, from the industry, but from the sport. But you know, it's a hobby, and it's like my husband's into motorbikes, and he loves going on trips away in his camper van, you know. So my hobby is the greyhounds.
You're both speed freaks, basically.
Yeah,
you're looking for fast dogs, he's looking for fast motorbikes.
Yeah, that's it. And thankfully, you know, he helps out with the dogs, and on a Sunday and a Monday he helps with Mum so as I can get away to the track. So that gives me that mental break that I can just keep going, you know.
Lynda, it seems like you're still very passionate about the sport, and I dare say that will remain the case for many years to come. You love the dogs, but you also love the people involved in the sport. Oh,
absolutely. Salt of the earth people. They really are. And you know, I see the dogs coming into the track on a Sunday and a Monday, and I see them, and all the dogs, most of them you could take to Crufts, you know, and the rest of them, you know, they're probably too boisterous to take to Crufts, you know, but there's some of them, you know, they just come in, their coats are gleaming, and they're well fed and everything else, and the people that look after them it's just enjoyable to see them at the track every Monday and every Sunday, and it's my sort of enjoyment. Tiny, come here, what's all that barking about, darling? It's not you, is it? No. She came up to say, it's not me that's doing the barking, it's the dog next door. You all right, darling? Were you sitting in the cool?
Lynda, thanks so much. Give us your hands. I wish you all the luck in life. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you.